Here's a few other interesting things that you can do here. As I'm drawing with my brush here, now I've switched back to my mouse and this is just not as much fun here. So I'm going to go back to my stylus here. I could sit here and draw all day. This is so much fun here. Now the neat thing here is, do you notice the X that appears and disappears beside my brush cursor there? That's actually kind of important. When the X is visible beside your cursor there, so there's my X there, what that means is that I'm going to start a new path or a new drawing segment, that little X. So the X means I'm going to create a new path. When the X disappears, what that means is I'm going to continue the path. I'm going to continue this existing path here. See how it disappears there? I can continue on here, and it's continued that line for me. So that's the idea there. The X is there, new path, X disappears, I continue the path. Okay, so hopefully you've had lots and lots of fun here drawing some neat shapes and so on. I've kind of made a mess of this here, so I'm going to get rid of all of this. I'll just hit Control-A or Command-A on the Mac, press Delete on my keyboard, and I'd like you to go and insert one of our project files here. So just go up to File and then down to Place. Head up to your desktop, into your Project Files folder, into Part 1, and into your Lesson 5 folder, and we're looking for Heads. So go ahead and place Heads onto your page here. And what Heads is, I'll just zoom out here a little bit, this is quite literally just a page that I scanned out of my sketchbook so that we'd have something here to work on. So I have a couple of heads here. In fact, you'll recall this center head here from our previous lesson here. And I want to show you a couple of neat things that you can do with your brush tool inside Illustrator CS3. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And what I want to do with my brush tool is actually ink my pencil sketches here. And we'll see how this works out here. Whenever I'm attempting something like this, I usually like to zoom in nice and close. So maybe this is the head that I'm going to attempt to paint over top of with my brush tool. The other thing that I like to do is lock this artwork down. See, right now I can move it around. I like to lock it down. And so to do that, I'm going to hit Control-2 or Command-2 on the Mac. And then I'll switch back to my brush tool just by pressing the B key. And I'll bring my cursor into place here and then just begin to carefully trace around my pencil drawings here. Ears are always pretty difficult here. What I'm doing, by the way, after each one of these, and I've actually kind of figured this out of frustration here, is what I'm doing is I'm holding down the Control key and just single clicking to deselect my path after I draw it. So I draw a path here. I'll do my jaw line here. Not the greatest job in the world, but that's okay. There, it's done, and then I just hold down Control and click away or tap with my stylus here. I'll just kind of quickly finish this up here. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to do an amazing job here. This is more to give you a sense of how this might work here. My arm is sticking to the table here, so I'm having a little bit of trouble here. But you know what the cool thing is? Let me switch back to my mouse here just for a second. At any time, I can switch back to my white arrow tool, and just like any other path in Illustrator, I can come in here and go, good Lord, what an awful job I've done here. Come back in here, clean it all up. Something like this. Use my direction lines, all this sort of thing. I could grab my pen tool and subtract out some of these anchor points if I wanted to, something like this. Oh, there we are. Something like that. I could continue on and do the eyebrow and the eye and so on, but hopefully this gives you a good idea here. Let's go down and try one of these other ones here. We've already worked on this face before here. Maybe I'll try doing this one very quickly here. So what I'm going to do this time, though, is I'll switch the brush that I'm using inside my brushes palette. So I'll go back to my original brush here, and I'll just hit the B key on my keyboard and then begin the long process of tracing some of this artwork out here. And I'm not doing a very good job here, but this is the idea here. Something like this. So you can get some really neat artistic effects here in Illustrator, whether you're using your mouse or a stylus or whatever you happen to be using here. Some very sketchy type effects here. Something like this. It's pretty neat stuff. So hopefully you get an idea of how the brush is working here. Now, one final thing that I will point out here, if you go and double click on your brush tool over in the toolbox, you'll get your preferences for your paintbrush. So you can fiddle around with these options if you like. You can set fidelity, for example, and this controls how accurately Illustrator is going to recreate the lines that you draw out. The smoothness percentage, which controls how smooth Illustrator recreates your lines. And then also you have some options down here. Now the one that I want to show is fill new brush strokes. And the reason why I want to show this is something that Illustrator used to do all the time in previous versions here. So I'm going to turn this guy on just to show you here, and I'll click on OK. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of pan away here so I have some white space to work in here. I'll go back to my black arrow tool just for a second. And what I'll do is I'll set a fill color in the bottom of my toolbox. So I'll go over to my swatches palette here and just grab any old color. It doesn't really matter at this point. And then when I switch back to my brush tool, here's what happens. As I start drawing different shapes and so on, what happens is that shape, which by the way is what's known as an open path because it's not a closed object, what happens is it fills with color. And how that works is Illustrator takes into account the starting point and the ending point and just draws a straight line between the two to fill them with color. So in previous versions of Illustrator, we'd have to constantly remember to turn off our fill color. And it used to drive many, including myself, absolutely buggy because you'd have to remember to turn that off every time you went to use the brush tool. So instead, we can just double click on the brush tool here, turn this guy off. I'll click on OK here. Even though I have a fill color here, when I draw a new shape here, I'm not getting that fill color coming in. In fact, you can see that after I've drawn this squiggly line here, take a look at the bottom of my toolbox there, Illustrator has completely removed my fill color. So there you go. You can double click on the brush tool to get your preferences there. You can fiddle around with some of those different settings. And that'll work, by the way, whether you have a drawing stylus like I have here or if you're just using your mouse.